Hello and welcome to the Paranormal Paradox Podcast. I'm your host Kieran, thank you for joining. In this podcast we're going to be talking about all things to do with the paranormal, ghosts, UFOs, cryptozoology and much more. So sit back and relax. Our first episode is going to take us to Scotland's capital, Edinburgh, where I'm going to be telling you about one of the world's most haunted places, the Edinburgh Vaults. The Edinburgh Vaults are built into a bridge called the South Bridge. The South Bridge was built in 1785, between 1785 and 1788, to connect the High Street of Edinburgh, the Royal Mile, with the university over on the south side of the city. Now, before the bridge was built, people had to go down through a street called the Cowgate. The Cowgate was the slum of the city, the poorest area, where the waste would build up in the street. The farm animals would have to go through there to get to the marketplace. Really wasn't a very safe or nice part of the city, and of course they didn't want the rich and the students to have to walk through there to get to the university, so they built this bridge to connect to the south side of the city. Now, the bridge itself was very controversial when it was built. It cost the equivalent of £15 million in today's money to build, and they had to knock down 3 streets in order to build it: Nidries Wynd, Peebles Wynd and Marlon Wynd. This caused a lot of controversy for the people. You see, the problem was that Edinburgh was a very small city at the time. It was only about 1 square mile big, with a population of around 50,000 people crammed into this small space, so you can imagine that overcrowding was completely out of control. So they wanted to expand the city out to the south. But in the 1700s, people were unsure of new things, so they weren't really sure that this bridge was a good idea. But they went for it anyway. The bridge itself was a feat of engineering. Built up of 19 different arches. 18 of those arches were hidden away by the buildings built up either side. And inside those 18 arches were 120 different rooms. These rooms were known as the Edinburgh Vaults. The sole purpose of these rooms was for storage, so merchants could store their goods there. Food, clothing, alcohol, that sort of thing. The problem was, the bridge was built so quickly and so poorly that when it would rain, which would happen an awful lot, then the water would drip into the bridge and start damaging the goods within. Food would rot, clothing going mouldy, alcohol going bad, to the point that the merchants were forced to move everything out. When they move everything out, that's when the poor, the homeless and the criminals, they move in. You see, Edinburgh Council, in their infinite wisdom, had decided to make homelessness illegal, meaning that you could be arrested or even executed for just being homeless. So people had no choice but to live underground. And when they lived underground, they lived in absolutely horrendous conditions, with about 30 people to one room, all crammed in together. Nowhere for their waste to go. They would have 1 bucket in the room that would just fill up. The smells would be absolutely horrendous. No candles down there, because candles were a luxury, so if you could afford a candle then you might as well live above street level, so they would burn things like fish oil or animal fat, which would absolutely stink. Not burn for that long either, 45 minutes. And if you couldn't afford to relight it, you'd live in perpetual darkness. Well, the conditions down there were absolutely horrendous. The pain and the suffering that would go on was unimaginable. So it's no wonder that the Edinburgh Vaults are said to be one of the most haunted places in the world. On a regular basis, YouTubers go there, paranormal groups go there, and they experience all manners of things. Voices, shadows, footsteps, even feelings of being touched, scratched. Some people have even been knocked unconscious. But who's causing these problems? Well, there's a plethora of spirits down there. The most famous spirit down there is the Watcher. The Watcher was a night watchman who used to patrol the bridge at night. He doesn't like women, he doesn't like children, he hates people in his space. So when guests go there, women quite often hear heavy breathing in their ear, and the words, "Get out!" whispered sharply. Men have an overwhelming sense that they are not on their own, and that there's someone standing in their personal space. They have that fight or flight response of where they either want to lash out or they flee in terror. He's also called Mr. Boots because he likes to stomp up and down the street, causing massive heavy footsteps to be heard. The smell of rotten teeth, whiskey and ale is on the air as well. One report comes from an American couple who were doing a private tour down in the vaults, and the tour guide was telling them the history of the vaults, and the woman from the couple starts panicking, starts getting really agitated as she says she can see someone standing at the end of the vaults, and this person standing there with a big blue cloak, tricorn hat, big heavy boots, and starts making his way towards her. The tour guide and her husband can't see a thing, can't see what she's panicking about. The tour has to end early because she is so freaked out. He's been caught on camera a few times as a large, dark, looming shadow. There's also the spirit of a lady called Mary McKinnon. Now, Mary McKinnon used to run a brothel that was inside of the vaults. One night, 3 men go to the brothel and start hassling the girls, wanting some free stuff. Mary is so angry that she removes a knife and she plunges it into the heart of one of the men. She's executed for murder, and it's said that her spirit wanders the tunnels of the Edinburgh Vaults. It's said that people see a woman in period clothing, clutching at her neck, crying and sobbing loudly. When they go over and ask if she's okay, thinking that maybe she might be an actor or a tour guide, she looks at them with a blank expression, lets out a blood-curdling scream, and walks through the wall. She's known to be the Banshee of the South Bridge Vaults. If you ever get a chance to go and visit the vaults, I highly recommend it. They're very creepy places, very dark, and for anyone who is a paranormal enthusiast, it is one to check off the bucket list. Thanks very much for listening. If you have got a story that you would like to have read on the Paranormal Paradox Podcast, or if you would like to appear on the podcast in an interview and you've got a location that you'd like to talk about, or even you might own a location that is haunted and you want to talk about it, then please email me at the Paranormal Paradox Podcast at gmail.com. That's the Paranormal Paradox Podcast at gmail.com. Thanks very much, guys, and sleep tight.